he might have had higher unfavorability ratings, but she had higher ratings against her when it came to being honest and trustworthy. And so it's as if voters said, we're going to pick the devil we don't know versus the devil we do know.
And I think this is important, the issues. The issues did not matter in this campaign. It was all about character. It was about persona rather than policy. We haven't seen an election like that, but I want to be clear. It was all about persona. The people making up their minds in the last 8 weeks chose Trump over Clinton, not because they loved him, but because they really disliked her.
Juliana, on Capitol Hill, what's the sense, and Frank mentioned it, when Jim Comey sent the letter 10 days out, and then reiterated a little over a week later that, okay, no, we will not be reopening this investigation. And we talked to all manner of experts who believed, while it might not have an impact on Hillary Clinton's chances, that perhaps if you looked for a place where it would hurt, it was those down ballot races. Is the sense that perhaps if there are a lot of other reasons Hillary Clinton lost, that particularly was why all these candidates were suddenly running stronger than they thought?
Well, look, I think what the initial Comey letter allowed for these down ballot Republicans to do is to change. They got to go on offense instead of defense, to move the conversation away from Donald Trump, the Access Hollywood tape, and to make this argument that they needed to be reelected to be a check on a Hillary Clinton presidency. Again, just to show you how surprising the whole night is that Republicans were fashioning an argument assuming that Hillary Clinton would become president. I was in Pennsylvania a couple weeks ago and I spoke to Senator Pat Toomey, who, by the way, finally last night said that he voted for Donald Trump after refusing to say where he was, after Pat Toomey looked like he was winning and after Donald Trump looked like he was winning too, I might add. But I asked him, look, by making this check and balance argument, aren't you saying that Hillary Clinton's going to be president? And he said, well, she's in the lead right now. That's the way it's looking. So, you know, they just had this all.
And almost 50 million early votes were cast during that time,
right,
that potential reinvestigation loomed.
The other piece that we were talking about, and I interviewed you on this, Frank, many moons ago for The Atlantic, was the chasm that seemed to be opening up between men and women, and particularly men and women who were married to each other, but that does not seem to have been borne out, does it?
It was borne out. But Trump simply did better among men than Hillary Clinton did among women.
But he won white women.
But he didn't win non-white men. He did not win. He's got a problem, and his country is a problem, because not only have we chosen size by gender, but we've chosen it by income, we've chosen it by education, we've chosen it by race. And I think that you've seen this continued divide that is actually expanding. And who's going to be the person who spans that divide? And that's why I liked his speech so much last night. I mean, it was late. We all were tired. We're still watching it. Nobody had gone home at this point. Nobody had any sleep. And people walked away going, wow, I hear that. I get that. I like that. They don't necessarily believe it's going to happen. But boy, that's exactly what they want to happen.
The first 100 days then, Juliana, we talked about, admittedly, how Hillary Clinton might effectively govern in something that did not come to pass. Now that he has congressional majorities, and now that his first big bit of business will be nominating a Supreme Court justice, what's that going to look like, and can we bid a fond farewell to Merrick Garland?
Yeah, I mean, the Merrick Garland nomination is essentially dead in the water right now. You know, we had gamed out all sorts of scenarios if Democrats were to have retaken the Senate, but right now, you know, the next Supreme Court justice who's going to be nominated is going to be nominated by Donald Trump. He has said that he would nominate justices who would overturn Roe versus Wade, and he has put a list, I think, out of 20-some potential nominees, a mix of federal appeals court judges, all essentially a rock star list of conservative names, but appealing to the more conservative wing of the Republican Party.
For someone like Harry Reid, who is outgoing, who actually managed to have a Democrat hold on to that Nevada Senate seat, this must be bittersweet for Democrats in the Senate who are looking towards Chuck Schumer to potentially be majority leader.
It's not
more
bittersweet.
Bitter than sweet.
And I think it's only bitter.
Yeah.
Frank Luntz, Juliana Goldman. again, part of the network coverage last night. So really, this is just nighttime for you with sun.
Your viewers don't realize, but there's actually a bed under there, and I'm not going home.
Crawl back under.
It's a trundle.
Crawl back under. We appreciate it. Thanks to you
Sure,
both.
Thanks, you guys.
How did Trump pull off one of the biggest upsets in presidential election history?
Right after the break, Anthony Mason tells us the ways that Trump won. Plus, Donald Trump wasn't the only victor last night. Pot also won the day, and it's now legal in at least 3 more states, including California, Nevada, and Massachusetts. On this Wednesday afternoon, the country has a new president, Donald J. Trump, and the race was called shortly before 3 a.m.
But how did he get this win? Our Anthony Mason gives us a look at the 3 keys to the Trump triumph.
The first was male voters, men. He won them 53 to 41%. He also won whites without a college degree by more than a 2-to-1 margin, 67 to 28%. And voters told us that the quality they wanted most in their candidate today was a candidate who could bring about change. And among those voters, Donald Trump won 83%. So huge landslide in that category there, the most important quality. And finally, there was a lot of talk after the Access Hollywood tape, and a lot of leading Republicans pulled back their endorsement from Donald Trump, that Republicans might in fact flee from him. Well, that didn't turn out to be the case today. He won 9 out of 10 Republican voters. They came home to Donald Trump.
After last night's historic victory, Donald Trump's campaign manager, Kellyanne Conway, joined CBS this morning to talk about what's next for the president-elect.
So tell us about the conversation between Secretary Clinton and Donald Trump.
It was a very gracious conversation about 2:30 a.m. or so. And we had already gone over to the Hilton to meet our supporters. We had been watching the returns throughout the night here at Trump Tower. And after we made our way there, our plan was really just to wait and see if the rest of the states and the presidency had been called. And in the meantime, my phone rang, and I handed it to Mr. Trump, and he and Secretary Clinton had a brief but very gracious, very warm conversation. He commended her on how smart and tough she is and what a great campaign she ran. And she congratulated him on his victory.
He did talk about bringing the country together. What are some of the immediate steps that he will take in order to do that?
Well, one step that he'll take immediately, Nora, is to meet with President Obama. And I know he's very excited for that meeting. The two of them spoke last night. The president-elect and the president spoke last night into, well, really early this morning into the wee hours. And Mr. Trump looks forward to going down to the White House and meeting with President Obama and having a smooth transition. You know, we can learn an awful lot from those who don't support us. And that's one thing that we even try to do here at the Trump campaign, was listen to people and hear what their concerns are, their frustrations, their fears. And I think that will continue in a Trump presidency.
Will you share with us how that conversation came about with Donald Trump and President Obama? When did that happen?
President Obama reached out to Mr. Trump, ironically, while Mr. Trump was on the stage. So the call was missed at first. And timing is everything. And, of course, he called him immediately when he knew that. And they talked, well into the wee hours, 3 or 3:30 a.m., I would say. And that was also a very cordial conversation among, between two men who had been at battle, frankly. I mean, President Obama was really trying to transfer his considerable popularity and political currency over to Hillary Clinton. And I think he and the First Lady, Michelle Obama, went all out for Hillary Clinton, trying to get her to victory. We're pretty active on the trail.
Kellyanne, it is being described as the biggest political upset that some people have seen in history. Some people are even using that phrase. When did you guys know that it was going your way, that this was going to happen?
About 2.5 weeks ago, it started to come together, Gail. We had really navigated and survived a number of darker days here on the campaign, and we started to notice a few things, that we were becoming more competitive in some of these traditionally blue states. And these are states like Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania that are very attracted to the Donald Trump message of creating jobs, bringing back manufacturing jobs, certainly curbing illegal immigration, talking about fairness to the American worker, creating new jobs, and I think, frankly, just being an outsider. But what really started to crystallize is that we noticed all the time that Hillary Clinton had a difficult time in each of these swing states getting at 45, 46, 47%, let alone the 50% plus that President Obama achieved twice. And then I think the perfect storm was completed by Obamacare premiums increasing in October. People were literally opening up their mailboxes, clicking onto their computers, and finding the notices that their premiums were exploding under Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act. So it really all came together. Mr. Trump stuck to the issue set, continued to run the campaign as he always has with these big rallies, and wherever we went, literally, any stop that we added, he had huge crowds.
President Obama addressed the nation from the Rose Garden at the White House. Despite his party losing the election, he remained optimistic that the country can move forward together.
I had a chance to talk to President-elect Trump last night, about 3:30 in the morning, I think it was, to congratulate him on winning the election. And I had a chance to invite him to come to the White House tomorrow to talk about making sure that there is a successful transition between our presidencies. Now, it is no secret that the President-elect and I have some pretty significant differences. But remember, 8 years ago, President Bush and I had some pretty significant differences. But President Bush's team could not have been more professional or more gracious in making sure we had a smooth transition so that we could hit the ground running. And one thing you realize quickly in this job is that the presidency and the vice presidency is bigger than any of us. So I have instructed my team to follow the example that President Bush's team set 8 years ago and work as hard as we can to make sure that this is a successful transition for the president-elect. Because we are now all rooting for his success in uniting and leading the country. Now, everybody is sad when their side loses an election. But the day after, we have to remember that we're actually all on one team. This is an intramural scrimmage. We're not Democrats first. We're not Republicans first. We are Americans first. We're patriots first. We all want what's best for this country. That's what I heard in Mr. Trump's remarks last night. That's what I heard when I spoke to him directly, and I was heartened by that. That's what the country needs. A sense of unity, a sense of inclusion, a respect for our institutions, our way of life, rule of law, and a respect for each other. I hope that he maintains that spirit throughout this transition, and I certainly hope that's how his presidency has a chance to begin.
That's the president addressing the nation from the Rose Garden. Earlier, we spoke with Margaret Brennan following the president's remarks.
He attempted to be gracious in the defeat of the woman he had hoped would be his successor. But this, of course, is now an election that has brought Donald Trump to the White House. And he's called him unfit for office. He's called him a threat to American values. At one point, he said his election would in many ways determine the fate of the very republic. So this was a very different tone that we heard from President Obama today, who really focused on what he said he wants to be an easy, orderly transition of power. Really spoke about how his aides are standing by, ready to help Donald Trump hit the ground running January 22nd. But I want to give you a sense here, DeMarco, that the crowd I saw here of White House staffers, this was packed into the Rose Garden. There were many red eyes, there were many sad faces, and in many ways, he wasn't just speaking to the cameras, to the Americans and to the world. He was speaking to all of them gathered here, saying, thank you for all of the work you did. He said, yes, we are licking our wounds, but you got to keep fighting. And really, in that way, addressing something he didn't want to explicitly say, which is in many ways his signature policies that he has enacted over the past 8 years are all in jeopardy. And they were at the centerpiece of a campaign led by Donald Trump, who has promised to repeal all of them, particularly Obamacare, his signature domestic policy, and to rip up that nuclear deal with Iran. Whether or not that happens, it's not clear, but this was definitely a sobering moment for President Obama and the vice president alongside him, who stood there, a man who had at one point considered challenging Hillary Clinton for the Democratic nomination, but ultimately decided against it after the tragic death of his son. So for the two men to stand there and address the world saying this is not a speech we ever expected to make, but America will still be America. This transition will happen. It will be orderly, and keep pushing for some of the policies that we enacted here. So we'll see, DeMarco, whether over the next 2 months in office, President Obama can in any way buttress his agenda, put up any kind of protections around some of those items. It's not clear, though, with this Republican win on Capitol Hill, whether he will have a partner willing to do that for him.
Margaret, the president also mentioned that he was heartened by Trump's unity message post-election. And I also wanted to touch on the back and forth between the president and now the president-elect. He said that democracy is not always inspiring. And I'm just curious, your thoughts on the public's image of this whole election cycle and now the president trying to say, America, it's time to come together.
Well, that is the president's chief focus right now. That's what White House staff say. This is going to be about trying to bridge some of these divides in what was an extremely contested, very divisive election. But they misread the public. Most people misread the public, apart from some very prominent pollsters, many of them working for Donald Trump. So this was really, in many ways, startling. President Obama didn't expect to make this speech today. He expected to transition from his historic presidency to another groundbreaker, the first woman who was going to enshrine many of the social policies that he had enacted. And this was a sharp rebuke to that, a very different world order. What remains to be seen is whether that message from unity from Donald Trump last night is signaling that the rhetoric is not going to match the actions of the president-elect, and that perhaps as someone who has divergent views from the Republican Party that now controls many Republicans, I should say, that control Capitol Hill, that perhaps there is some room for negotiation and compromise there. That is the hope that many, certainly left-leaning policymakers are pinning things to right now, but it's just unclear what's going to happen. But we do know is Donald Trump's transition to offices just a few blocks from here. They've already been meeting with White House officials, and as soon as Donald Trump makes his cabinet appointments, they'll get security clearances and start getting read up so that they can hit the ground running.
All right, Margaret Brennan from the White House today. Margaret, thank you.
Hey, Margaret, thank you. Meanwhile, Hillary Clinton delivered her much-awaited concession speech at the New Yorker Hotel in New York City earlier today.
Secretary Clinton remarked on how she accepts the results of the election, even if the outcome still hurts.
I want you to remember this. Our campaign was never about one person or even one election. It was about the country we love and about building an America that's hopeful, inclusive, and big-hearted. We have seen that our nation is more deeply divided than we thought. But I still believe in America, and I always will. And if you do, then we must accept this result and then look to the future. Donald Trump is going to be our president. We owe him an open mind and the chance to lead. Our constitutional democracy enshrines the peaceful transfer of power. And we don't just respect that, we cherish it. It also enshrines other things: the rule of law, the principle that we are all equal in rights and dignity, freedom of worship and expression. We respect and cherish these values too, and we must defend them.
During her speech, some of Clinton's supporters and staffers were openly weeping. So in addition to the presidential election, some states are buzzing today over newly approved marijuana measures. Voters in California, Nevada, and Massachusetts approved to legalize it.
Everybody's talking about it, but in Maine, the vote is still too close to call at this hour. And Arizona failed to pass the law. John Blackstone is in San Francisco with how this could impact the entire country.
Before midnight, those celebrating at Spark needed a medical certificate to legally use marijuana. After midnight, with the passage of Prop 64, recreational marijuana became legal in California.
I think we can expect to see the industry grow and thrive.
Eric Pearson, CEO of Spark, says his organization provides medical marijuana to some 20,000 clients, but retail sales may not be permitted until January 2018. It will be legal to grow. It will be
forward to tax and regulate marijuana for adult use.
Gavin Newsom, California's lieutenant governor, was a leading supporter.
And California now has sent that message powerfully to the rest of the nation. That is a point of pride from my perspective.
Last night, voters in Nevada and Massachusetts also approved measures to legalize marijuana for recreational use, joining 4 other states and the District of Columbia. A similar measure was defeated in Arizona, and votes are still being counted in Maine.
Look, it was a big night for those that believe that we have been on an incarceration binge in the last 40 years, those that believe that criminalizing people's behavior as it relates to personal choice and drug use somehow is going to solve the problems.
But under federal law, marijuana remains illegal everywhere. Zev Yaroslavsky is with the UCLA Luskin School of Public Affairs.
People at the grassroots level in states across the country are saying, nuts to that, and we're taking matters into our own hands. We want to legalize it, and I think Washington at some point is going to have to listen.
Under Prop 64, those convicted of marijuana-related crimes in California can now apply to have their records cleared. But until the rules for retail sale are worked out over the next year or so, anyone who wants to buy marijuana legally in California still needs a medical certificate and to come to a dispensary like this one.
Well, coming up, Stephen Colbert attempts to be the voice of reason. Can he do it? The Late Show host says that maybe we overdosed on politics this year. You think? This is CBS 8. Stay with us.
Between both parties during his live uncensored election night Showtime special.
Yeah, here's a portion of what he told audiences after the results of the 2016 election came in.
Politics is a lot of horse race, and horse race is gambling. And gambling is, according to the Bible, a sin, because it itself is a poison. Worrying about winning and not what the consequences of winning is. And I think the people who designed our democracy didn't want us in it all the time. Informed, yes. Politicking all the time? I don't think so. Not divided that way. They designed an election that was meant to confuse us and bore us a little bit. That's why the Electoral College exists.
Wall Street reporter Laura Keller joins us now. Laura, I'm curious about the way Trump came out and had this sort of conciliatory tone. Do you think that had an impact on the markets?
Yes, I think there were a lot of people who really pointed to his speech. Traders that I talked to this morning said, I was expecting maybe this to be a really, bombastic sort of speech in the Trump style, similar to how he had, talked about in recent rallies. But instead, it was actually a very presidential speech by most people's standards. And I think that that really helps people to kind of walk this back and say, well, wait a minute, maybe we shouldn't have these big bets against the S&P. We should just think more about what he will do as a president. We need to think about those things, and then the market started to turn.
And I wonder if it helped also that President Obama came out, Hillary Clinton came out this morning, both saying that they're going to work to make sure that there's a peaceful transition of power and that we should give them a chance.
Right, exactly. And I think that's where you saw Wall Street really looking forward and trying to figure out what is it that he's going to do? Where do we see the optimism? Because there were certainly industries, certain sectors within the economy that people really looked to and said, well, actually, this could be quite a good thing for some of the earnings power in some of these companies. Or if you look at banks, which is what I cover, a lot of people are looking at the financials and saying, wait, maybe he'll pull back some of this regulation that really has been such a thorn in all of our sides in terms of earnings potential. And that has actually been quite a positive in the stock markets today.
I spoke to a couple of mutual fund investors, and I mean those who manage the funds, and some hedge fund traders, and they say that volatility is their friend, that they're looking at some of the volatility and they're seeing opportunities. But for the average investor, the people who have their 401ks, what should they be thinking about? Should they be worried?
I mean, it's really tough as a 401k investor. I was actually thinking about this last night. Should I move, things into cash? It's quite difficult as an individual investor to call any sort of bottom. So even if you said, well, maybe I'd like to pull out my cash today, I mean, to actually do that, it's very difficult to time the market correctly. And a lot of times, too, with your 401k, you have to think about the bond managers and the stock managers who are actually managing that portfolio. They hedge against some of these things. Right. And that's not something that's very easy for us to do on an individual basis.
When you look at the overall health of the economy, what is Wall Street most concerned about in the coming months?
I think that they would really like to see a rate rise. Wall Street has been wanting this for so long. Whether you're talking about, the normalcy of credit markets, we've had this sort of what some people have looked at as a bubble over the last couple of years. Or if you just look at more of a lending environment, there are different agencies within the government have looked at certain lines of lending, like commercial real estate, for example, and said, this has really gone too far, and it's really all propelled by these interest rates. So if we can get that sort of normalized, that might be a good thing, and a lot of investors have considered this morning that perhaps, with Donald Trump's influence, we won't get that December rate hike, but maybe we
You
would
think
in
it's
the
not
future.
going to happen because the conventional wisdom was it likely was leaning towards a rate increase?
Yeah, if you think about the volatility, this morning we had, I think it was down to, was it less than 50% of a chance? And before the election last night, it had been 82%. When I last checked before coming over here, it was at 82 again, so we've gone back. But I think that people are thinking longer term here.
I think a 25 basis point rate hike is in the cards, I think, going forward. And there you see the closing bell. 256.88, that's 1.4%. There's a little after hours trading there, but that's the final number of the Dow Jones Industrial Average. Laura Keller, thanks so much for stopping by. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Business mogul and Washington outsider Donald Trump has been elected 45th president of the United States, if you haven't heard. And this morning, Democratic opponent Hillary Clinton publicly conceded the election alongside her husband, former President Bill Clinton, daughter Chelsea, and running mate Tim Kaine.
This is painful, and it will be for a long time. But I want you to remember this. Our campaign was never about one person or even one election. It was about the country we love and about building an America that's hopeful, inclusive, and big-hearted. We have seen that our nation is more deeply divided than we thought. But I still believe in America, and I always will. And if you do, then we must accept this result and then look to the future. Donald Trump is going to be our president. We owe him an open mind and the chance to lead. Our constitutional democracy enshrines the peaceful transfer of power. And we don't just respect that, we cherish it. It also enshrines other things: the rule of law, the principle that we are all equal in rights and dignity, freedom of worship and expression. We respect and cherish these values too, and we must defend them.
Trump himself spoke last night at his own election party in Midtown Manhattan. His family was there, his advisors, and his running mate Mike Pence. He spoke about the need for unity after a divisive and brutal campaign.
Now it's time for America to bind the wounds of division. We have to get together. To all Republicans and Democrats and independents across this nation, I say it is time for us to come together as one united people. It's time. I pledge to every citizen of our land that I will be president for all Americans, and this is so important to me. For those who have chosen not to support me in the past, of which there were a few people, I'm reaching out to you for your guidance and your help so that we can work together and unify our great country.
That was Donald Trump last night. Earlier this afternoon, President Obama addressed the nation from the Rose Garden. He said he invited Trump to come to the White House tomorrow and that the focus now is on a successful transition of power.
Everybody is sad when their side loses an election. But the day after, we have to remember that we're actually all on one team. This is an intramural scrimmage. We're not Democrats first. We're not Republicans first. We are Americans first. We're patriots first. We all want what's best for this country. That's what I heard in Mr. Trump's remarks last night. That's what I heard when I spoke to him directly, and I was heartened by that. That's what the country needs. A sense of unity, a sense of inclusion, a respect for our institutions, our way of life, rule of law, and a respect for each other. I hope that he maintains that spirit throughout this transition, and I certainly hope that's how his presidency has a chance to begin.
With us now from Washington is Washington Post reporter Amber Phillips. Amber, good to see you. Hope you got some rest.
A little bit.
Less than 3 hours, I'm sure. All right, so there's a big meeting tomorrow between President Obama and President-elect Donald Trump in Washington. What are you hearing about that discussion?
Yeah, well, I'm hearing what we're all hearing, which is the public speeches by Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, and President Obama. The three people today is sort of revolving around. Everyone seems very conciliatory, very gracious. There's a general theme of unity. You hear Democrats from Hillary Clinton, President Obama say, hey, let's give Donald Trump a chance to succeed. I think that's going to be the tone that both Obama and Trump are going to take tomorrow in the first transition meeting.
Yeah, we certainly heard that change of tone between both parties. I want to ask you, though, Amber, what are some of the challenges that Trump will face when he heads into the White House, not just with Democrats, but even within his own party?
Sure. Well, first of all, there's the challenge of a learning curve, right? He is the first president-elect to have never held an elected office. Donald Trump thinks he can do it. He says his business experience is enough. That he's going to surround himself with smart people. But I think it's undeniable there's a huge learning curve there. And then you have this tension within the Republican Party that has been really a narrative throughout this entire campaign. About 36 members of Congress, including the House Speaker, in some way shunned Donald Trump during this campaign. Now they're all going to have to work together. I heard Paul Ryan, the House Speaker, speak this morning, and he said everything's hunky-dory. It's just fine. We're going to, as soon as Trump's hand comes off that Bible, we're going to get to work on Republican priorities. But I think underneath that, there's a lot of healing to do.
Well, let's actually play a little bit of that, Amber. House Speaker Paul Ryan speaking about Donald Trump's win at a press conference this morning.
This is the most incredible political feat I have seen in my lifetime.
This is something you've heard me say time and again. 7 out of 10 Americans, they do not like the direction our country is going. Many of our fellow citizens feel alienated and have lost faith in our core institutions. They don't feel heard, and they don't feel represented by those in office. But Donald Trump heard a voice out in this country that no one else heard. He connected in ways with people no one else did. He turned politics on its head. And now, Donald Trump will lead a unified Republican government.
The key there being the word unified, Amber.
Right.
Donald Trump did this without Paul Ryan. He did this without some of the establishment Republicans. Is it your sense right now that they're coming around to kowtow because they have to?
Yeah, they have no choice, right? Donald Trump proved everyone, us in the media, pollsters, Democrats, Republican elites like Paul Ryan, wrong last night. They have absolutely no choice but to try to work with Donald Trump and this new coalition that Paul Ryan so accurately described that Donald Trump has truly built. I mean, he was a movement candidate. America has spoken, and I think Republicans sense that. To give you an example, Senator Lindsey Graham of South Carolina, one of the most vocal anti-Trumpers in all of Washington, said he voted for the independent candidate, Evan McMillan, last night. And then right after Trump won, he congratulated Donald Trump and said, I'm looking forward to working with you. I think Republicans in Washington and Trump would call them Republican elites, sort of realize that the party is moving toward President-elect Donald Trump and away from them. They have no choice but to work with him.
Amber, it's the first time since 1928 where Republicans control the White House, the Senate, and the House. So what's the lesson to Democrats today?
The lesson is get more voters to the polls. I think this election could have been very different if numbers are still coming out, so take this with a grain of salt. But if younger voters, Hispanic voters, African-American voters, voters in cities in general had come out in just like 2 to 3 percentage points more than they did this time around, and we could have seen a very different story. I think we could have seen a Democratic Senate, a Democrat in the White House, probably still a Republican Congress. But the lesson here is for Democrats that for some reason their ground game and their message just did not excite voters the way they needed them to.
I saw somebody on Twitter say, I know what it's like for the Remain Brexit people, how they felt, because so many people feel that way. And one of the issues for them was that younger voters who wanted to remain didn't come out to the polls.
Right, exactly. Listen, I think Donald Trump, we're learning today, was a movement candidate. Hillary Clinton, looking back on it, never really had that spark, that movement, that excited voters. We saw that in her primary with it dragging out with Bernie Sanders. It's quite possible in the end that's what undid her.
You're right, Amber. I think, and Rena brings up a good point, that we are going to see an autopsy report from the Democratic Party that is going to say, was this really the best candidate that we could have put forth after 8 years of President Obama? They had 8 years to cultivate somebody who would be acceptable to the American people, who wasn't a flawed and perhaps in some ways a damaged candidate. And with Hillary Clinton, as you point out, they weren't able to get the people to the polls.
Right, exactly. And now the question Democrats are asking, day one of the 2020 election at this point, is who's left on their bench? It's an open question right now. I think there are some talented female senators. I think Michelle Obama came out as one of the winners of this 2016 campaign with very forceful, emotional speeches. But it's a relatively thin bench right now. To your point, Vlad, Democrats had 8 years to come up with somebody, and they came up with the wrong candidate for the wrong election.
Amber Phillips in Washington. As always, Amber, we thank you so much.
Thank you.
Vladimir Putin is not the only world leader reacting to Trump's shocking victory.
Leaders from around the globe